All right, so my last video was about 40 minutes long, and if you noticed, we really didn't write that much code. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and do all the code over again and show you how little it was. All we did was run Rails new game arena, let that run, create the actual file. Then after that project is built, all we have to do is cd into game arena, and then now we're in the folder. We're gonna do Rails generate scaffold, and then we're gonna do room, name, string, and then run that, let that run. We'll go ahead and open up the code. I want to go to DB, then migrate, and then here we're creating the rooms here. This is the result when we run that Rails generate scaffold command. I'm going to go ahead and just add unique as true here. Make sure you save that. And the next thing we're going to do is run Rails DB migrate. This will actually execute that create rooms file that we have. And then we'll run Rails server to start up the server on localhost 3000. Now that we have our server running, the one other thing we want to do is go to routes and then uncomment this right here to rooms index. And if we refresh the home page, we can see now that we have our rooms. If I go ahead and click create a new room, I had a couple in the last one. I'll go ahead and copy them. We'll go back to rooms and we'll create a new room. And keep in mind that this isn't even code. All we're doing is really just, utilizing the code to create some stuff in the database. But we'll go ahead and create the room here. And then one more. Room 4. And honestly, that's about all the code that we did in the last tutorial, despite, the video being 40 minutes long, mainly trying to explain like what is actually happening. The one upside of Rails is that, this really only took, a couple lines of code, and we kind of have a fully functional, CRUD application. It's not a good one, but we'll go ahead and modify that a bit. One thing that I don't particularly like is that if I want to create a new room, I have to click on this here, and then it'll take me to this form here, and then I have to, fill out the form, and then click on create room, and then I have to go all the way back to the main page. And if we look at what is actually happening in the index.html, what we're doing when we're trying to create a room is we're clicking on this link to the new room and the new room path. But what we could do instead, which is a new thing that has only been added in Rails 7 using turbo frames. You can do a turbo frame tag, and I believe you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it room for now, and then do, and that do there just basically tells it that this is a code block. We're basically just wrapping this link here inside of a code block which has a turbo frame tag. And let's keep in mind what is actually happening here. New room path, that's going to take us. If we go ahead and examine our Rails routes here, new room is going to take us to the rooms controller and then the new function. So let me go ahead and rerun that server. And then I go to the new function. This is the function that's being called. And what that function will basically do is render the new view. So if we go to view and then we go to new.html, this is the view that is being rendered when we click on new room. But what we can do is we can wrap this as well in a matching turbo frame tag. And it has to be the same name. So we're going to call it room. And then we'll close that out here. And we can indent this real quick. And I don't think you have to indent it for the code to work, but it is a good practice. And let's go ahead and try this out real quick. If I refresh here and then click on new room, whoops, I did have a mistake here, which I don't fully understand why, but there's actually supposed to be an equal sign here, which in my mind, as I had learned it, this is supposed to be representative of outputting something, which I guess you can make the argument that all this stuff is being output. But either way, both of these lines, this line right here and then the one in index.html, both of them should have an equal sign. And now if I go ahead and refresh the page and then click on new room, bam, you can see here we have that form, which is pretty cool because now it's more like a reactive kind of single page application where we're not actually being redirected to some other page where we're creating that room. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we just, type in, the next room. We'll call this room number 6 at this point, and then we'll create it. And then it still redirects us here, and then we can go back to rooms, but we can see that it did create that room 6, which is pretty cool. And again, if we click on new room, you can see the same functionality happening. So what is actually happening if we, go to inspect and we look in the network? Let me refresh the page right here. If we click on new room, and if you look at the bottom left, you can see that there's still a link to the page that we're going to. But if we click on it, it is basically making this HTML request. And I need to make sure that I have all selected here. I'm going to clear all this out and then click on new room. And then you can see here we have this request coming in the network. And basically the request that we're receiving is a bunch of HTML. So if you've ever created an application in React or some other framework, you might expect, JSON. But in, Ruby on Rails and using Hotwire, it is sending HTML. It is called HTML over the wire. That is the acronym for Hotwire. So rather than receiving JSON, when we click on that new room link, we're basically receiving all of this HTML, which is the same HTML that we see here in the new.html.erb. You can see here we have the turbo frame tag, and then you can see here we're rendering the form for that individual room. So if I go to form.html, we're basically receiving all this HTML, which inside of it has all of this HTML. And if you want to, kind of prove that to yourself, we can just add in like a little bit of code here. We'll call this hello, and then we'll save it real quick. And let me go ahead and refresh and do the same thing. I'm going to clear out the console and then click on new room. And then if we look at new, you can see here we have this, div here that says hello, and it even, shows it right here. Now, in my mind, this is a lot more complicated and sloppy than JSON. I mean, this is just a very small, portion of HTML. You can imagine, in a production application, you could be receiving lots and lots of HTML, and it's a lot harder to like parse through all of this and find, what it is you're actually looking for. JSON, you have a very neat, this is the data that you're receiving and will be hydrating, the HTML, and you don't actually, have to parse through all of these different HTML tags to find it. But let's talk about what's actually happening here. When you have a turbo frame, turbo frames work with both links and forms. So everything you can do with a turbo link, you can also do with a form, to my understanding. In our particular scenario, what we have is just a link. We have a link to the new room. We click on it, and then it basically receives all of this HTML. And basically what it does is it renders the index.html.erb. And in that index.html ERB, we have, the turbo frame tag somewhere. We click on that link, we get an HTML response, and if in that HTML response somewhere we have a matching turbo frame tag, we're basically going to replace anything inside of this, turbo frame tag with, the stuff inside of that turbo frame tag that is in the response. So basically it's saying take all of this HTML and then put it inside of here. And basically that gets activated whenever you click on a link, because the link is basically going to take you to a different page, which is equivalent to, getting that HTML response. So if we look at this right here, what we don't really want, to replace, the new room link per se. What we really want to do is kind of replace all of this stuff, because it's pretty burdensome here to have all of this stuff on the page along with the form. So what I can do instead is I'm going to modify the turbo frame tag, and I'm just going to wrap it around this stuff instead. So here I can just put in the turbo frame tag, end it here, and we'll go ahead and indent this. Now if I click on new room, it will basically, populate that form in place of all that HTML. If I go back to rooms here, it will take me to localhost 3000/rooms, as you can see in the bottom left corner. Except that doesn't actually work. It takes me to localhost 3000/rooms/new, which is not what I wanted. And honestly, I don't know what happened, but let's think about what happened. I clicked on the link, which, renders this, new.html.erb, and it took all of this turbo frame tag stuff and basically replaced all of this code right here. So if I go back to, localhost 3000, click on new rooms, this is the state that we're currently in. We are on the new rooms page, but this, content has replaced all of this content. And when I click on, back to rooms path, and if we kind of inspect the console here and kind of redo that, let me go back to localhost here. I'm going to click on new room, and then we'll go back to rooms. We don't get any errors. And there's really no reason to think that, the behavior of this, application would be behaving the way that it is. We click on new room, we can clearly see that the link is supposed to be linking us back to rooms, but it doesn't actually do that when we click on back to rooms. And basically renders all of this content inside of that turbo frame tag, but not the stuff outside of the turbo frame tag. which is the content from slash rooms and not the content from slash room slash new, which, you know, would be the form itself. So it's a very odd behavior. Let's look at the network log and see what is going on. Let me go back to the beginning of that whole sequence and then clear out the console, click on new room. We are receiving new, which for some reason is including all of this crap up here, which we probably don't want. It should only be rendering the turbo frame ID is equal to room slash turbo frame. I think ultimately what is happening is that we are kind of in a cycle here where, you know, we start out on the index page, we click on the link, and that renders, you know, new.html, and basically looks for the turbo frame tag and then replaces, you know, all of this content in here. But what's happening is that now when we're on the new.html and we click on this link right here, it's basically doing the exact same thing where, you know, we click on the link that takes us back to index, and index is basically doing the same thing where it looks for the turbo frame tag because it's being rendered by turbo, and then we're basically going to replace all of this HTML here with this HTML that we see here, which would explain the behavior where we're seeing where when we click on back to rooms, the only stuff we're seeing is that stuff that we had inside of that turbo frame tag. And we can probably try to prove that real quick to localhost 3000. We click on new rooms and then we go to back to rooms, and all we see is rooms because we moved all of that outside of the turbo frame tag. As for why, you know, the URL isn't updating correctly, I'm not exactly sure why, but I assume it is related to what is happening here. Rails behaving in a way that's intuitive is not Rails. So let's go back and try to figure out how we can do the thing that we're trying to do. Because what I would like to do is go back to localhost 3000. When I click on new room, what I want is I want that form to populate right here. Which, you know, that worked fine when I, you know, clicked on new room. But then, you know, I want this link here to take me back to the original page. All right, so after having looked at this particular tutorial, hotrails.dev, definitely check it out. It's a fairly well-written tutorial, pretty easy to follow along. I do think it has a lot of details that aren't really necessary, but, you know, some of the stuff that it does cover is pretty well-written and good. I just am not a fan of reading tutorials. They're just like, I would much rather watch coding videos. So, but anyhow, if you check this out, there are 3 rules that they mention. And we'll talk about all of them real quick. Rule number 1, we kind of already talked about. When clicking on a link within a turbo frame, turbo expects a frame of the same ID on the target page. So basically saying that, you know, if I'm looking at index, you know, .html.erb, I click a link, and I have a turbo frame here, we're basically expecting that when I click on that link, we're going to be receiving another turbo frame tag with that same ID, which is going to be room. We could call this whatever we want. We can call it roomsies. And as long as we have a matching ID, that'll be all good. So rule number 2, you know, kind of is the same thing as rule number 1, basically saying that, you know, if there isn't a turbo frame, then the frame disappears and then you'll get this error here. What I really wanted to cover, though, was rule number 3. And it says that a link can target another frame than the one it is directly nested in thanks to data turbo frame. And then you can read through this, but basically the spoiler here being that I just need to add this data turbo frame and then the name of the frame there. So here in my link, what I can do is have data turbo frame, and then here we'll have rooms. And that should hopefully allow me to get the functionality that I was hoping for, where when I click on new room, my bad, I misspelled that, roomsies. If I click on refresh, click on new room, there we go. We have the new room link is still there, but what it did was replace everything inside of that turbo frame with, you know, the stuff that is inside of the turbo frame for new.html.erb. And again, you know, this could have been, I could have moved all this stuff outside of the turbo frame tag, and then the only thing you would actually see is that new room right there. So let me refresh one more time, and demonstrate that new room, and then how all we have is, new room, which is the only stuff that is inside of that turbo frame. So basically the TLDR, if you want, your link to be outside of whatever that turbo frame is that you're going to be trying to populate with some kind of data, you need to have this like data turbo frame and then have that ID that matches, this particular turbo frame. And that basically tells it, okay, when I click on this link, render this new .html.erb and then stick it inside of this turbo frame with the matching ID that matches this ID and this ID. But okay, let's go back to the home page, click on new room, try out this form. What happens if I click on new room again? Nothing. All right, that's fine. If I click on back to rooms, that will take me back to the index.html, and it looks like everything is rendering as I would expect it to. If I click on show this room, this still takes me to a different page, which is something that I want to avoid. Like what would be kind of nice is if I click on show this room and then this entire HTML element, if I inspect here, if this entire div here with room 1, if we replace all of this HTML inside of here with, the HTML that we see inside of the show room where we can edit and go back and destroy and etc. So let me go ahead and try to get that going. In order to do that, what we would do is we would go to this link to show this room. That will render room.html. So we're going to want this to be wrapped in a turbo frame as well. And what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and do turbo frame ID. And keep in mind that this is pretty much the exact same thing as having this turbo frame tag up here. But, sometimes you're writing code in that HTML.erb format, and sometimes you're writing it in, kind of plain HTML format. Even though turbo frame is not technically HTML, this type of format is going to have a more HTML-like syntax. So, if I wanted to add in a class, then I would do, this is my class name here. But for now, I'll just leave that off. We're going to give this an ID, and we'll call this, edit room. And I'm not sure what the convention is, whether that ID should be, camel case, which is common in Rails, or the dash, which is more common in HTML. Another thing that I hate about Rails, there are so many different conventions. Sometimes you're writing this syntax, sometimes you're writing in camel case. Most of the time you're writing in snake case. Coming back to this turbo frame here, which is going to add in that turbo frame, call it the ID of edit room, and then I want to go to room.html, and we're going to wrap this also in a turbo frame. We can do it either way we want to. We could probably do it like this with the turbo frame, or we could do it, with the ERB syntax. I'll go ahead and do it like that just to prove that, it doesn't have to be an exact match. For example, obviously right now we're doing ERB for this particular component, but in this component we have like the HTML syntax. The only difference is we want to change this to edit room, and hopefully that will work. Let's see what happens if we refresh and I click on show this room. Boom. Well, that's not exactly what I had in mind. And that is because I was looking at room.html.erb. What I think I wanted, or is it show.html? Yeah, I think this is what I was looking for. My bad. All right, so I'm going to modify that here. Show.html. That will not only render, the room, which will render this, room.html here, but it'll also show me the edit and the back to rooms link, and it'll also give me the button to destroy that room. But if I'm going to do that, I also think I need to modify the link here. Instead of this link being to the room, well, maybe that is all I need to do. Let me go ahead and refresh and look at it. So if I click on show this room, bam, okay, that's good. We see, the name is my room, edit back to room. We kind of have a redundancy here where we have my room twice. So let me look and see why that's happening. In index HTML, here it says render room. So I'm going to put that inside of the turbo frame, and hopefully that will basically replace, all of this stuff inside of the turbo frame with all of that stuff in show.html. And refresh. And if I click on show, bam, we have, edit, back to room, destroy this room. I'll go back to room. And if I click on back to room, cool, we're back. It looks like we, landed directly on that So that's kind of cool. I can, go ahead and do that for any of these. I can, I can somewhat conveniently destroy the room. It does, like if I click on destroy here, it'll get rid of that room. Cool. Show, destroy, bam, destroy. Well, this is a little odd. I'm seeing more rooms than I feel like I originally had. What is going on here? All right, let me go back. Okay, I apparently destroyed all of them, but it didn't update and it didn't show me that I was destroying them. All right, let me create a new room here. I think there are a couple different bugs going on, but we're going to try to handle them one at a time. Create that. Let me go back to rooms. That link is not working correctly. That's why. Let's just go back to the home page real quick. Yeah, it seems to be changing the actual, room that we're seeing. And if I refresh the page, it goes back to Jane's room. So that's very odd. And one subtle thing you might not have noticed is earlier when I had the turbo frame tag on the room.html ERB, I think what was happening was it was rendering the show page because that link actually, I believe this goes to the show.html.erb. So when you link to just that room, the Rails routes, see here we have room. When we make that get request, it goes to rooms show. That will render that show.html.erb. But what was happening was because inside of show.html.erb, we were also rendering the room here, which is the reason why we saw that room name pop up when we clicked on the show button. So if I click on show this room, I see edit room and destroy this room and then back to rooms. Back to rooms apparently seems to be working okay for now. Destroy this room doesn't work quite how we would think it would work. And that is, I think, because we need to rely on turbo streams for when we kind of modify something in the database. Whenever we click on this destroy this room button, what happens is we go to the destroy function here. And then it calls, at room.destroy. So it knows automatically what room it's looking at. And let's see if this works. So we go to the room model. Broadcast, remove to. And then we'll just go ahead and put in the edit room. Go back to localhost 3000, show the room, destroy the room. Real quick, if you happen to run into an error like the one that I ran into, what you can do is you can run this Redis server command that'll run up the Redis server, assuming that you have it installed correctly, and then you'll want that to keep running in the background while you work on your application. I believe Redis kind of handles all the streaming and the action cable stuff that Turbo Streams kind of relies on. If you don't run into that error that I ran into, you don't need to do this, but I needed to do it in order for my application to function correctly. All right, so after a little fiddling around, let's go to room, our model here. I'm gonna just leave this off for now. After destroy commit, this is all I have on room.rb. After destroy commit, then we're gonna do broadcast, remove two rooms. And rooms will need to be, this is what I was missing, I think, is that we need to have a turbo frame tag that matches that. Right here we have room Z's, but that's, it's for a different purpose. What I really want here, div ID here, maybe we'll call this, so this will have to be turbo frame tag, and then we'll give this rooms. I don't think I need that ID there. Maybe I do, I'm not sure. But for now, that's what we'll do. We'll, and then we'll have to wrap that, instead of this div here, we'll just have end for the turbo block. A little better. Oh, and I don't have my % here. All right, let's see if that works. The other thing, so this is a do block. This ends here. This is another block. That's an end. I do need to have a do here. I think that might be my problem. And so if I refresh, hopefully, all right, let me create a new room. Room number 3, create that room. Then let's go back to rooms. Need to go back to the home page. All right, we see room number 3, show the room. If I want to destroy the room, nope, that did not work. Feel like what's happening is we're receiving something that's getting put into this stupid turbo frame. So sanity, create the room, and then we're gonna go back to the home page, clear that out, see what happens if we click on show this room, clear that out, destroy the room, and then here we're getting the rooms page back, and we see here that we have the turbo frame ID is roomsies, and that is, and I think maybe it has to do with the rooms controller. After we destroy, we're basically redirecting to the room's URL, but I don't think we need to do that. So what was happening was that we were basically calling this function after we do the destroy, but then it would be basically try to redirect back to the room's URL, which is typically what it would do. But in this particular scenario, because we're using turbo streams, we don't want to actually redirect back to that index page. We want to stay on the index page, and basically this is equivalent to, I don't know if you know JavaScript, but if you have something in JavaScript, you know, this is something similar to, you know, get element by ID, and then we'll, you know, whatever that room's ID is, but we'll just, you know, say that this is an instance of a room, and then, you know, we're basically getting that, and then we're going to be, you know, removing it from the DOM, basically. That is kind of what's going on here. We're basically saying, okay, we're going to be doing some kind of turbo stream action. The actual action that we're doing is going to be a remove, and we're removing that item. And because the context here is going to be, you know, turbo stream format, we're not actually hitting either of these lines of code. So if we wanted to, we could, you know, just get rid of them altogether. It really doesn't make too much of a difference, but let's go ahead and real quick make a couple more rooms. I've made quite a lot of them. Let's try to run back one more time what's going on. You know, I click on show this room. We see that, you know, we have this button to destroy the room, which is in the show.html. That will basically call the delete method. And we put on the model, you know, after destroy, this is what we're going to do. We're going to broadcast to the rooms. So that would be this stream right here. We have to have a turbo frame for it, unfortunately. I don't think if we got rid of this that this would still work. Just try it real quick though. Destroy. Yeah, so it doesn't work quite how we would imagine it working. We need to tell it, okay, this is, you know, where that item is. We can call it anything we want to here. We're going to give it a different name just so I make it clear that, you know, we don't have to call it rooms. So peacock, doesn't really matter what we call it. We'll call it that. The main thing is that we need to have some element with an ID basically telling it, okay, this is where you're going to get that particular element from. Or in other words, this is where you're going to find that room. You also have to have this, you know, turbo stream from line of code somewhere. I think, I don't think it really matters where. A good convention might be to just put it at the top there. This basically generates some kind of HTML. I don't know exactly what it is. We might be able to look at it. So if I go to, you know, body, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain that this is the HTML that gets generated when you add in that line of code. And then on the actual model, we need to have, you know, after destroy, broadcast, remove to, and then here, you know, we changed the name to peacock, so we need to do that. And then finally on the rooms controller, we need to have some format turbo stream, which basically says, okay, find that instance of that room, which we know from, you know, this turbo stream is inside of that peacock turbo frame, which will basically find, you know, the instance of that room that we tried to delete, and it'll remove it from the DOM. And just to prove that it still works after we change the name to peacock, click on destroy this room. Hopefully it will delete the my room. And there it is. It's gone, with the caveat that we have this crap here for some reason. So let's try to figure out why this is kind of behaving the way it is. I show the room, I click on destroy room, keeping in mind that right now what we're seeing is the index page. And when we click on that show room button, we are rendering this entire show.html.erb inside of this turbo frame. But basically this whole section here is that peacock turbo frame. And then this section right here is that show room function. Within it we have kind of this div ID room 24, which is basically that room.html. One thing I think I could do maybe is try to move all this show.html. What I'm wondering is right here, we have this DOM ID room, and maybe if that's, determining what it's destroying, that it's only going to be removing this stuff from the HTML. So maybe if I move this, so instead of if at room, I'm just going to have that DOM ID here, and then instead of that second end tag, we'll have a end for the div. All right, so no, that didn't work. All right, so I did a little bit of fiddling around. I think what might have happened here. So this is supposed to be DOM ID. This should be an @ here because this is an instance variable, which really makes me wonder why in underscore room.html this also wouldn't be an instance variable. It's another one of these like Rails things that are completely inconsistent and poorly designed, in my opinion. Because here we're rendering that, instance of the room, but here it just, magically has access to that room variable without having to call, the @ symbol, which is supposed to be representing an instance. Hopefully now that I have updated that, if I go to show, again, same problem. So let me go back here. This needs to be an instance variable. That needs to be, no, it doesn't. That's a path, my bad. But that needs to be an instance variable. For the record, this is just referring to a particular path in the Rails route and doesn't have anything to do with the instance of the room. But let me try this one more time. Show. Now, if I destroy the room, well, hold on. It's not actually showing the room name here. This should have an equal sign here. Show. Refresh. Yeah, this says my room. If I destroy it, bam. All right, finally, after lots of pain, it works the way that I expect it to. We do kind of have this new room sitting up here, but that's like a CSS thing, so I don't really care. I'm going to try my hardest to avoid doing any CSS. I really hate the fact that when I look for tutorials and they, advertise that they're Rails tutorials, and over half of the time they spend talking about styling, which has nothing to do with Rails. So what I am going to do is I'm going to see if this will work because I don't think Tailwind works right out of the box. I believe I could have just added it pretty simply when we started up at the beginning of the tutorial. If I just did, Rails new my app and then passed in this CSS Tailwind argument. But let's see if this will work now that I already have a running application. Copy and paste this command bin bundle. And here I'm going to go ahead and copy this as well. Hopefully, this is all I need to do. I'm running into an error, which I don't like. This says add scripts to the package.json right here. Run our Rails server, see if everything blows up. Yep. Because I don't really want to spend hours trying to troubleshoot this Tailwind bullshit, I'm just going to probably start up a new application, picking up where we left off, kind of how I did it in the beginning of this video, where we just kind of go through the code one more time. Rather than like actually, going into the explanation of, what the code is doing and why. And hopefully it won't be, I don't think we really did too much as far as, creating new content. But it'll also be a good review for, the way things are supposed to be done, because there was a lot of fumbling around trying to figure out how it's supposed to be done. Because, as I've said many times before, Rails is awful. All right, I'm going to keep working toward making this more like a single page application. Here, we have this after destroy commit, but you can imagine that we also have one for, after create, something like that. I don't remember the exact syntax, but they also have one for after update. So we're going to add those in and then maybe get into a little bit of stimulus. I want to make sure that I do have a little bit of CSS working so I can, at least kind of demonstrate some things, even though I'm not going to focus on making the app look super pretty, at least not, in the beginning. Maybe like later down the road, if I continue, working on the application and actually get into the flow of, how everything is supposed to be done, then maybe we'll focus a little more effort on, making everything look pretty and, trying to create something useful. At the moment, I'm really just kind of playing around with Rails and just trying to get a good idea of how the flow of everything is supposed to be. So once again, thank you for checking out the video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll have some time to work on a new video in the near future.